A cold wind pushed dust along the empty highway as Daniel Harper slowed his car and looked at the road sign ahead. The paint was faded, half of the letters chipped away by time, but the name could still be read if someone stared long enough. Ash Hollow. Population: 2,104. Daniel stared at the number for a moment, then glanced past the sign at the town stretching silently across the valley. 2,000 people had once lived here. Now there were none. Or at least that was what everyone said. Daniel was a journalist who had spent most of his career chasing strange stories: missing hikers, abandoned towns, cult disappearances. Most of the time the truth ended up being boring. A financial collapse, a natural disaster, a family feud blown out of proportion. But Ash Hollow was different. No records explained what happened. No official report. No evacuation notice. No deaths. One day the town existed. The next day it didn't. 20 years ago every resident vanished overnight. Daniel had first heard about Ash Hollow from an old internet forum dedicated to unsolved American mysteries. Someone had posted a blurry satellite image of the empty town along with a short caption. Does anyone know why Ash Hollow was abandoned overnight in 2006? The thread had exploded with theories. Government experiments. A chemical leak. Mass cult suicide. But none of those theories had evidence. The strangest part was that the town still looked normal. Lights had once been left on. Cars were still parked in driveways. Meals were left half-eaten. It was as if the entire population had simply stood up and walked away at the same moment. Daniel had spent 3 months researching it. The deeper he dug, the stranger things became. Police records from nearby counties had missing pages from that week. The mayor's office had burned down the following year. The state archives had files labeled restricted. And every person Daniel contacted who had once lived near Ash Hollow ended the conversation the same way. Don't go there. That warning alone was enough to make Daniel pack his car and drive across 3 states to see it for himself. Now he was here. And the silence was heavier than he expected. Daniel drove slowly into town. The first thing he noticed was the cars. They were everywhere. Old sedans, pickup trucks, bicycles leaning against fences. Most were covered in dust and rust, but they hadn't been stripped or vandalized the way abandoned places usually were. It felt less like a ghost town and more like a town that had simply paused. He parked near the center of town and stepped out. The air smelled dry and stale. A grocery store stood across the street. The windows were cloudy with dust, but the signs still hung above the entrance. Miller's Market. Daniel pulled out his camera and began recording. Daniel Harper reporting, he said quietly. I'm currently standing in the town of Ash Hollow, Nevada. 20 years ago, the entire population of this town disappeared overnight. No official explanation has ever been released. His voice sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness. He walked across the street and pushed open the grocery store door. The bell above it rang. The sound echoed through the building like it had been waiting 2 decades to be heard again. Inside, the store looked frozen in time. Shopping carts stood between aisles. Shelves were still stocked with canned food. A basket of rotten fruit had collapsed into dark liquid near the entrance. Daniel moved deeper into the store, his footsteps crunching lightly on the dusty floor. Behind the checkout counter, a receipt printer still held a half-printed receipt. He read it aloud. Milk. Bread. Eggs. Total: $12.47. The timestamp made him pause. April 18th, 2006. 10:42 p.m. That was the exact night the town had disappeared. Daniel felt a strange chill crawl up his spine. Someone had been buying groceries minutes before the entire town vanished. He turned off the camera for a moment and looked around. The silence felt different now. Not empty. Just quiet. As if the town was holding its breath. He shook the feeling away and left the store. The sun was beginning to sink behind the mountains, turning the sky orange and purple. Daniel knew he should probably leave before dark. But curiosity pushed him forward. He walked down the main street, peering into houses and buildings. A barber shop with scissors still lying on the counter. A diner with plates still sitting on tables. A school where notebooks remained open on desks. Everywhere he looked, the same question lingered. Where did everyone go? Daniel eventually reached the edge of town where a small residential neighborhood Saturday. One house caught his attention. The front door was open. He stepped inside cautiously. Hello. No answer. The house looked lived in. A television sat in the living room. Family photos hung on the wall. A calendar displayed April 2006. Dinner plates sat on the kitchen table. Half eaten. 2 chairs pulled out. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Something about the scene felt wrong. Not abandoned. Interrupted. As if whoever had been eating had suddenly stood up mid-meal. And left forever. Then he heard it. A sound. Very faint. Footsteps. Above him. Daniel froze. The house was supposed to be empty. He slowly looked up toward the staircase leading to the second floor. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Daniel whispered, "Hello." No response. For a moment he considered leaving. But the journalist inside him refused. He slowly climbed the stairs. Each step creaked under his weight. When he reached the top, he saw a hallway with 3 doors. The last door at the end of the hall was slightly open. And he was certain it had not been opened before. Daniel approached it slowly. His heart pounded harder with every step. He pushed the door open. The room was empty. Just a small bedroom with a bed, a desk, and a closet. But the window was open. The curtains moved gently in the wind. Daniel stepped inside. That's when he noticed the dust on the floor. Except there was one place where the dust had been disturbed. Fresh footprints. Barefoot. Leading to the closet. Daniel stared at them for a long moment. Then he slowly opened the closet door. It was empty. But something was written on the back wall. 3 words scratched into the paint. "Don't stay after dark." Daniel felt a sudden chill run through his body. He turned around quickly. The hallway outside the room looked darker now. The sun had almost completely set. And somewhere in the distance, deep in the town, a door slammed shut. Daniel hurried downstairs and stepped outside. Night was falling fast. The streetlights flickered on one by one. He stopped walking. Streetlights shouldn't have power. Not after 20 years. Yet they glowed faintly along the empty street. Daniel suddenly had the overwhelming feeling that he was no longer alone. He turned slowly. At the far end of the road, standing under a streetlight, was a figure. A person. Perfectly still. Daniel's voice came out dry. "Hello." The figure didn't move. Daniel took a cautious step forward. Then another. The person looked like a man. But something about him felt wrong. His posture was stiff. His head tilted slightly to one side. And his eyes reflected the streetlight like an animal's. Daniel stopped walking. "Do you live here?" he asked. The man didn't answer. For several seconds neither of them moved. Then the man slowly raised one arm and pointed down the street. Daniel followed the direction of the finger. And his blood ran cold. Dozens of figures stood silently in the darkness, watching him. Men, women, children, all perfectly still, all staring. Daniel's breath became shallow. Where did you come from?" No answer. The first man took one step forward. Then another. Behind him, the rest of the figures began to move as well. Not running. Just walking slowly toward Daniel. Something deep in Daniel's instincts screamed that he needed to leave. Now. He turned and ran for his car. The sound behind him changed. The footsteps became faster. Closer. Daniel reached his car, threw the door open, and jumped inside. He started the engine and slammed his foot on the gas. As the car sped down the road, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The entire street was filled with people. Hundreds of them now. Standing in the road. Watching his car disappear into the darkness. And every single one of them had the same empty expression. Daniel didn't stop driving until the town was far behind him. Even then he kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see them following. But the road remained empty. Hours later he reached the nearest city and stopped at a motel. His hands were still shaking. He uploaded the footage he had recorded to his laptop. Most of it looked normal. Until the final clip. The one recorded inside the grocery store. Daniel stared at the screen. The camera had been sitting on the counter while he read the receipt. Behind him, in the reflection of a freezer door, someone was standing in the aisle. Watching him. A pale figure with hollow eyes. Daniel rewound the footage. The figure had been there the entire time. Standing silently. Waiting. And as the clip ended, the figure slowly raised one hand. As if waving goodbye. Daniel closed the laptop slowly. Outside the motel window, the parking lot lights flickered. For a brief moment he thought he saw a group of people standing across the street, perfectly still, watching the motel. Then the lights flickered again. And they were gone. Daniel never returned to Ash Hollow. But sometimes late at night his phone received strange notifications. Photos he never took. Videos he never recorded. Each one showing the empty streets of Ash Hollow. And in every photo the same thing appears somewhere in the background. A growing crowd of silent figures. Standing closer to the camera each time. Watching. Waiting. For him to come back. Daniel didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the figures standing under the streetlights. The way they hadn't chased him, only walked. Slowly. Patiently. Like they knew something he didn't. At 3:17 a.m. his phone buzzed. Daniel flinched and grabbed it from a nightstand. Unknown number. A message notification. He hesitated for a moment before opening it. The message contained no text. Only a photo. Daniel's stomach tightened as the image loaded. It was a photograph of Ash Hollow. The exact same main street he had driven through hours earlier. The streetlights glowed faintly in the darkness. But that wasn't what made his skin crawl. In the center of the street stood a single figure, looking directly at the camera. Daniel zoomed in. The figure's face was blurry, but the posture was familiar. Head slightly tilted, just like the man who had first pointed down the street. Daniel checked the metadata of the photo. Taken. 3:12 a.m. 5 minutes ago. His motel room suddenly felt smaller. He told himself it was probably someone messing with him. Maybe a local prank. Maybe someone had followed him. But that explanation didn't hold up. Ash Hollow was almost 80 miles away. Daniel locked the motel door and pulled the curtains closed. Then he opened his laptop again. If something strange was happening, he needed to document it. He began writing notes. Time. Location. Events. But halfway through typing, another notification appeared. This time it wasn't a message. It was a video file. Sent from the same unknown number. Daniel stared at it for a long time before pressing play. The video started with static. Then slowly the image focused. Daniel felt his throat tighten. It was his motel. The exact one he was staying in. The camera angle looked like it had been recorded from across the street. The video slowly zoomed toward the second floor. Toward his room. Room 214. The curtains moved slightly in the wind from the air conditioner. The camera kept zooming closer. Daniel's heart pounded. The recording had clearly been taken only minutes ago, which meant someone was outside right now, watching him. He stood up and walked slowly toward the window. Every instinct told him not to look, but he pulled the curtain back anyway. The parking lot was empty. No cars. No people. No camera. Just the humming of the lights. Daniel quickly shut the curtain again. When he looked back at the laptop, the video had ended, but the screen had frozen on the final frame. A reflection in the motel window. Someone was standing behind the person filming. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. The figure in the reflection was tall and pale, and its head was tilted at the exact same angle as the people in Ash Hollow. Daniel slammed the laptop shut. He left the motel before sunrise. The entire drive home he kept checking his mirrors, but nothing followed him. For several weeks, life slowly returned to normal. Daniel wrote the article about Ash Hollow, but he left out the part about the people in the street. No editor would believe it anyway. The article went viral online. Millions of views. Thousands of comments. Most readers debated theories about the disappearance. Some claimed Daniel had staged the whole thing. Others believed it was a government cover-up. Only a few comments stood out to him. They all said the same thing. I've been there too. One comment in particular caught his attention. The username was Old County Archive. The comment read, "They don't like visitors staying after dark. You were lucky they let you leave." Daniel stared at the message. Then he replied, "Who are they?" Several hours passed before the user responded. They aren't people anymore. Daniel felt the same chill he had felt inside the empty house. He typed back, "What happened to the town?" The reply came almost immediately. "They're still there. They never left." Daniel's fingers hovered above the keyboard. "What do you mean?" The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, the message arrived. "Have you checked the footage again?" Daniel frowned. He had already reviewed everything, but curiosity pushed him to open the laptop once more. He loaded the grocery store video, the one where the pale figure appeared in the reflection. He watched it carefully. At first nothing seemed different, but then he noticed something that made his heart stop. The figure behind him was closer now. Daniel paused the video, rewound, played it again. It wasn't a trick of the light. In the original footage, the figure had been at the end of the aisle. Now it stood only a few feet behind him. Daniel quickly checked the file date. It hadn't been edited. It was the same file, but the image had changed. His phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. Daniel opened it slowly. This time it was another video. The timestamp said it had been recorded that morning. The location tag made Daniel's blood turn cold. Ash Hollow. The video began with the same empty street, but the camera was moving, walking slowly through town, like someone was exploring the streets, or returning home. The camera passed the grocery store, the diner, the houses. Then it stopped, in front of the same house Daniel had entered. The door was open again. The camera moved inside. The kitchen table was still there, the plates still sitting where Daniel had seen them. But now there was something different. 3 chairs were pulled out instead of 2, and someone was sitting in the 3rd chair. The figure's back faced the camera, its head tilted slightly to the side. Then slowly, very slowly, the figure turned around. Daniel gasped. The face on the screen was his own. The video ended. For a long time Daniel sat in silence. Then his phone buzzed again. A new message appeared. This time it contained only 3 words. "You stayed after dark." Daniel felt the room spin slightly. He looked around his apartment. Everything was normal, quiet, safe. Yet the same heavy silence from Ash Hollow seemed to fill the air. Then he noticed something that hadn't been there before. On the wall beside his desk, 3 words scratched faintly into the paint. The same message he had seen in the closet. "Don't stay after dark." Daniel slowly backed away from the wall. His phone vibrated again. Another photo arrived. Daniel opened it with trembling fingers. The image showed his apartment building, taken from the street outside. Under a streetlight stood several figures, perfectly still, watching his window. And behind them, more shapes were emerging from the darkness. Men, women, children, all with the same tilted heads, all staring at the camera. And this time Daniel noticed something new. Among the crowd, one of the figures looked exactly like him, standing motionless beside the others, waiting, as if Ash Hollow had followed him home. Daniel didn't move for a long time. The glow from his phone lit the dark apartment as he stared at the photo. His mind tried to find a logical explanation, but every possibility collapsed the moment he looked again at the figure that looked exactly like him. Same height, same jacket, same posture, standing perfectly still among the others. Daniel slowly walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see the street. The sidewalk below was empty. The streetlight hummed quietly. No figures, no crowd, just an ordinary night. For a moment he wondered if he was losing his mind. He closed the curtain again and leaned against the wall, breathing slowly. Then his phone buzzed again. Another message. Another image. This one made his stomach twist. It was a photograph of his apartment living room. The exact room he was standing in, taken from the corner near the ceiling. Daniel slowly turned his head toward that corner. There was nothing there. No camera. No person. But the angle was correct. The photo had been taken from inside his apartment. His hands began to shake. He checked the time the photo was taken. 2 minutes ago. The message below, it said only one sentence. "We found you." Daniel grabbed a flashlight and searched the apartment. Closet, bathroom, kitchen, behind the couch, every corner. Nothing. But something felt wrong. Not like someone was hiding. More like someone had been there, watching. He returned to the living room and noticed something new. Footprints. Bare footprints. Faint marks in the dust near the window. leading from the wall to the center of the room, and then stopping, as if whoever made them had simply vanished. Daniel stepped back. His breathing became shallow. Another message arrived. This one wasn't a photo. It was a voice recording. Daniel hesitated before pressing play. At first there was only static. Then whispers. Dozens of voices layered together. Men, women, children, all speaking softly at the same time. The words slowly became clearer. Come back. Come back. Come back. Daniel dropped the phone onto the couch. The whispers continued through the speaker. Come back to Ash Hollow. The recording ended. Daniel sat there, frozen. Then something outside caught his attention. A shadow moved past the curtain. Daniel carefully approached the window again. He looked down. A single figure stood under the streetlight. The man with the tilted head. The same one from the road in Ash Hollow. He wasn't looking at the building. He was looking directly at Daniel's window. Even from 2 floors up, Daniel could see the pale reflection in his eyes. They stared at each other for nearly a full minute. Then the man slowly raised one arm and pointed. Not at Daniel. Behind him. Daniel turned around quickly. His apartment door was slowly opening. Just a few inches. The hallway beyond was dark. Daniel whispered, "Hello." No answer. The door continued to open with a quiet creak. And then it stopped. The hallway was empty. But Daniel heard something moving. Footsteps. Slow. Dragging slightly across the floor. Coming toward the apartment. Daniel backed away from the door. The footsteps stopped right outside. Silence filled the room. Then 3 soft knocks echoed against the door. Knock. 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 Daniel didn't move. His phone buzzed again on the couch. He looked down. A final message appeared. You were never supposed to leave. The doorknob slowly began to turn. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. The door opened a few inches more. In the darkness of the hallway, pale shapes began to appear. Faces. Dozens of them. Stacked behind one another. All with the same tilted heads. All staring into the apartment. Watching him. Waiting. One of the faces slowly moved forward through the doorway. And Daniel felt his entire body go cold. It was the version of himself he had seen in the video. Same face. Same eyes. But completely empty. The other Daniel stepped into the apartment. The crowd behind him remained in the hallway. Silent. The copy tilted its head slightly. Then it spoke in a calm, hollow voice. You stayed after dark. Daniel couldn't speak. The copy took another step forward. You saw us. Another step. And now you belong to the town. Daniel shook his head. No. But the copy only smiled faintly. Everyone who sees Ash Hollow after dark becomes part of it. Daniel's legs felt weak. The copy raised one hand. And suddenly the whispers filled the apartment again. Hundreds of voices. The same voices from the recording. Come back. Come back. Come back. Daniel looked toward the window. The street outside was no longer empty. The entire road was filled with figures now. Standing silently under the lights. Watching the building. Waiting. The copy of Daniel stepped closer until it stood only inches away. Then it whispered something that made Daniel's blood freeze. The town isn't empty. It's expanding. The lights in the apartment flickered. The whispers grew louder. And the last thing Daniel saw before the room went completely dark was hundreds of pale figures slowly filling the hallway behind the door. All of them with the same tilted heads. All of them staring at him, as if welcoming him home. Darkness swallowed the apartment. For several seconds Daniel couldn't see anything. The lights had completely died, leaving only the faint glow from the streetlight outside leaking through the curtains. The whispers stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything he had experienced in Ash Hollow. Daniel slowly stepped backward, trying to keep distance between himself and the copy standing in front of him. Stay away from me, he said, though his voice barely worked. The other Daniel didn't move. Its empty eyes reflected the dim light from the window. The faint smile remained on its face, calm and unnatural. Behind it, the hallway was still filled with shapes. Dozens of pale faces staring into the apartment. Waiting. Watching. The copy spoke again. You shouldn't have come. Daniel's mind raced. This isn't real, he whispered to himself. But it felt real. Too real. The cold air. The smell of dust. The sound of slow breathing that didn't belong to him. Then suddenly the apartment lights flickered back on. Just once. For half a second. But it was enough. Daniel saw the hallway clearly. There weren't dozens of figures anymore. There were hundreds. Stacked deep into the corridor, shoulder to shoulder. Faces stretching far beyond what the hallway should have been able to hold. Like the space behind the door had become much larger than the building itself. Then the lights died again. Darkness returned. The copy tilted its head further than a normal neck should allow. Bones inside its neck made a quiet cracking sound. You saw the town. Another step forward. You heard us. Another step. Now the town sees you. Daniel backed into the kitchen counter. There was nowhere left to go. His mind screamed for a way out. Then something clicked. The message. Don't stay after dark. He remembered the moment he left Ash Hollow. Night had already fallen. He had stayed. That must have been the moment something changed. But maybe it wasn't too late. Daniel suddenly pushed past the copy and ran toward the front door. The pale figures in the hallway did not move. They simply watched him. Their heads tilted in perfect unison. Daniel forced his way through them. But something strange happened. When he touched them, they didn't feel solid. Their bodies felt cold and hollow. Like walking through thick fog. He burst into the hallway and ran for the stairwell. Behind him, hundreds of footsteps began moving. Not fast. Never fast. Just slow. Patient. Following. Daniel sprinted down the stairs and slammed through the building's front door. Cold night air hit his face. The street outside was completely full. Figures stood everywhere. Sidewalks. Road. Parking lot. Every streetlight illuminated pale faces. Thousands of them. All staring at him. Daniel stopped running. There was nowhere left to go. The copy of Daniel stepped out of the building behind him. It walked calmly through the crowd. The others moved slightly aside to make room. Like they were allowing their leader to pass. The copy stopped a few feet away. Its expression remained calm. You can't leave now. Daniel shook his head desperately. There has to be a way. The copy stuttered him. For a moment something strange flickered across its empty face. Almost like curiosity. Then it asked a question. Why did you come to Ash Hollow? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Fear made it hard to think. But finally he spoke. Because no one knew what happened. The copy was silent. Daniel continued. I wanted the truth. The crowd around them whispered softly. Hundreds of overlapping voices. The truth. The truth. The truth. The copy tilted its head again. Then you should know it. For the first time the crowd began to move closer. Daniel felt the cold presence of them surrounding him. The copy lifted its hand and pointed toward the road. The world around Daniel suddenly shifted. The city street faded. The apartment building vanished. And in its place stood the familiar empty road leading into Ash Hollow. Daniel looked around in shock. He was back at the town entrance. The same broken sign. The same silent valley. Except this time the town wasn't empty. Every street. Every house. Every window. Filled with people. Thousands of pale figures watching him from every direction. The copy stood beside him. This is what the town became. Daniel struggled to understand. What are you? The copy answered calmly. We are the ones who stayed after dark. Daniel felt his chest tighten. The entire town. Yes. The copy gestured toward the streets. 20 years ago something came here. Daniel whispered, What? The copy paused. Then it gave an answer that made the air feel colder. Something that lives in empty places. Daniel's mind tried to process the words. Like a creature. The copy shook its head slowly. No. Then it pointed toward the sky above the town. It's the dark itself. The streetlights flickered. The crowd whispered again. It grows where people disappear. It spreads through silence. It feeds on places that are forgotten. Daniel stared at the endless rows of pale figures. And you're part of it now. The copy looked directly at him. Yes. Then it said something even worse. And soon the town will grow again. Daniel's stomach dropped. What do you mean? The copy turned and pointed far beyond the town, toward distant lights on the horizon. A city. Daniel recognized the skyline. It was his city. The town follows the ones who leave, the copy said softly. And every place they go becomes a little more empty. The crowd began walking again, slowly, toward the distant city lights. Thousands of pale figures leaving Ash Hollow. Daniel realized the terrifying truth. Ash Hollow had never disappeared. It had only been waiting for someone new to bring it somewhere else. Daniel stood frozen at the edge of the road as the crowd began to move. Thousands of pale figures stepped forward in slow, synchronized motion, leaving the silent streets of Ash Hollow behind them. They didn't rush. They didn't speak loudly. Their footsteps barely made a sound. But there were so many of them that the ground seemed to breathe. Daniel looked back at the town. Windows were empty now. Doors hung open. Ash Hollow was becoming what people had always believed it was, an abandoned town. Except the town itself wasn't what mattered. The people were. And they were leaving. The copy of Daniel stood beside him, watching the endless procession move toward the distant city lights. You see now, it said quietly. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, this can't be happening. But the road was filling with them. Men in old jackets from decades ago. Women wearing dresses that looked like they belonged to another time. Children holding hands. All walking slowly toward the highway. Daniel turned to the copy again. You said something came here, he said. The dark. What does that even mean? The copy seemed to think about the question. Then it answered. Darkness is not just the absence of light. The pale figures continued walking past them. Sometimes it is a place. Another wave of people passed. Sometimes it is a door. Daniel felt a cold weight settling in his chest. And sometimes, the copy said softly, it is a hunger. Daniel looked down the highway. The crowd stretched so far that the end of it vanished into the distance. How many of you are there? He asked. The copy gave a small smile. More every year. Daniel suddenly understood something horrifying. People have been coming here, he whispered. Yes. Explorers, tourists, journalists. The copy nodded slightly. Curiosity is the easiest way in. Daniel remembered the online forums, the urban legends, the videos of people exploring abandoned places. How many came after me? The copy did not answer immediately. Instead, it pointed toward the back of the crowd. Daniel followed its finger. Several newer figures were walking among the older ones. Their clothes were modern. Their faces looked confused, lost. One of them was holding a camera. Another had a flashlight hanging from their neck. Daniel's stomach dropped. They were visitors, he said. Yes. And now they're part of the town. Daniel covered his face with his hands for a moment. He felt responsible somehow. His article. His video. Millions of people had seen it. How many of them would try to visit Ash Hollow now? How do we stop it? Daniel asked suddenly. The copy looked at him carefully. Stop it. Yes. Daniel stepped closer. There has to be a way to end this. The copy's expression remained calm. You cannot end a place. But it followed me. Yes. Then maybe it can follow me somewhere else, Daniel said. The copy tilted its head again. Daniel continued quickly. What if I lead it away from cities? What if I keep moving? What if I never stop? The copy watched him in silence. For the first time, the whispers from the crowd seemed uncertain. Daniel pointed down the highway. I'll go somewhere empty. Somewhere far away. Deserts. Mountains. Anywhere. If the town is tied to me now, then I can keep it away from people. The copy studied him for a long moment. Finally it spoke. You misunderstand. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? The copy stepped closer. You are not leading the town. The whispers around them grew louder. You are the door. Daniel felt the words hit him like ice water. The moment you stayed after dark, the copy continued. Ash Hollow began inside you. Daniel stepped backward. No. The copy pointed at his chest. The town no longer needs the valley. It no longer needs the houses. It only needs you. Daniel looked around in panic. The crowd had stopped walking. Every paleface was now turned toward him. Watching. Waiting. The copy spoke again. They are not following you. They are waiting for you to open the way. Daniel's heart pounded violently. How? The copy gave a quiet answer. By going home. Daniel suddenly realized what the distant city lights meant. Not just his city. Any place with people. Any place with life. Wherever he went. Ash Hollow would begin again. The whispers rose louder. Go home. Go home. Go home. Daniel shook his head. I won't. The copy's smile faded slightly. You will. Why? Because humans always return to where they belong. Daniel turned and ran. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he couldn't let the crowd reach the city. He ran down the empty highway away from the lights. Into the darkness of the desert. Behind him the crowd began walking again. Slow. Patient. The copy of Daniel followed at the front. Hours passed. Then days. Daniel kept moving. Through desert roads. Through empty gas stations. Through forgotten towns. He avoided every city he saw. Every highway leading toward people. But something strange began happening. Places he passed through started feeling different. Gas stations closed. Lights went out. Buildings became empty. People moved away. The silence spread like a shadow. And sometimes, late at night, Daniel would look behind him and see them again. The pale crowd. Walking slowly. Growing larger every week. Months later, a truck driver in northern Arizona reported something strange. He said he saw a man walking alone down an empty highway. The man looked exhausted. Like he hadn't slept in days. Behind him, far down the road, thousands of figures walked silently in the darkness. The driver never stopped. But before he drove away, he heard the man shout something into the night. Over and over again. Don't follow me. Go back. But the figures kept walking. Slowly. Patiently. Because Ash Hollow was no longer a town. It was a doorway moving through the world. And every mile Daniel walked, the darkness followed. The desert nights became colder as the months passed. Daniel walked under empty skies where the stars seemed too sharp, too distant. Wind dragged sand across the highway, whispering through broken fences and abandoned gas stations. The world around him had started to feel hollow, like Ash Hollow had been hollow. At first he thought it was only in his head. But then he began noticing patterns. A roadside diner he passed through one week would be closed the next. A small town he avoided would appear quiet and empty on the news days later. A motel clerk who had smiled at him one evening would simply be gone when someone else checked the building the next morning. Daniel tried not to think about it. But every night when he looked behind him, the crowd had grown. At first there had been hundreds. Then thousands. Now the line of pale figures stretched so far across the desert roads that he couldn't see where it ended. They always walked the same way. Slow. Silent. Patient. The copy of Daniel always remained at the front. Watching him. Waiting. And the distance between them never seemed to change. If Daniel walked faster, they walked faster. If he slowed down, they slowed down. Like a shadow tied to his body. One evening Daniel reached an abandoned rest stop somewhere between Nevada and Utah. The building was half collapsed, the parking lot cracked with weeds pushing through the pavement. A rusted vending machine hummed faintly near the entrance. Daniel hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. He stepped inside. The rest stop smelled like dust and old paper. Maps still hung on the walls. A tourist brochure rack stood near the door. Daniel grabbed a bottle of water from his bag and sat at one of the plastic tables. For a moment he allowed himself to rest. The silence felt too familiar. Too much like Ash Hollow. He closed his eyes for just a minute. And when he opened them again, someone was sitting across from him. Daniel jumped to his feet so fast the chair fell over. The copy of Daniel sat calmly on the other side of the table. Head tilted. Hands folded. Daniel's voice trembled. How did you get here? The copy didn't answer immediately. It looked around the empty rest stop. You stopped moving. Daniel backed toward the door. You were behind me. We are always behind you. Daniel glanced outside through the dusty glass. The highway looked empty. But he knew better. They were out there, just far enough away to remain unseen. You need to understand something, the copy said quietly. Daniel shook his head. I don't want to understand anything. But you must. The copy leaned forward slightly. The darkness does not want destruction. Daniel stared at it. Then what does it want? The copy's voice became softer. Presence. Daniel frowned. What does that even mean? The copy gestured toward the empty rest stop. Places disappear when they are forgotten. Daniel looked around slowly. The cracked walls. The faded maps. The silence. The copy continued. Ash Hollow was dying long before the night everyone vanished. Daniel remembered the research he had done. Population declining. Businesses closing. People leaving. The town had been fading. Lonely places call to the dark, the copy said. Because darkness fills empty space. Daniel's mind began connecting the pieces. You're saying the town didn't die because of the darkness. It invited it. The copy nodded. And now it lives through us. Daniel looked at the floor. And through me. Yes. Silence filled the rest stop. Wind pushed against the broken windows. Daniel finally asked the question that had been haunting him for months. What happens when the crowd reaches me? The copy didn't hesitate. You join them. Daniel felt a deep chill run through his body. And the door opens completely. Daniel whispered, For what? The copy looked directly into his eyes. For everywhere. Outside, the wind stopped. The silence became absolute. Daniel slowly turned his head toward the highway. At first he saw nothing. Then shapes began appearing in the darkness. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. Standing along the road. Watching the rest stop. The copy stood up. The time is close. Daniel's chest tightened. No. The copy stepped toward the door. You cannot run forever. Daniel grabbed the table. I'll keep moving. You are tired. I don't care. The copy opened the door. Cold night air flooded the room. The pale crowd stood only a few 100 feet away now. Closer than they had ever been. Their tilted heads reflected the moonlight. The copy stepped outside and turned back toward Daniel. Soon you will stop running. Daniel shouted after it. I won't. But the copy simply smiled. Then it returned to the front of the silent crowd. Daniel stood alone in the rest stop doorway. The wind began blowing again. The figures did not move. Not yet. They were waiting. Daniel grabbed his bag and stepped onto the highway again. His legs trembled with exhaustion. But he started walking. Into the darkness of the desert. Behind him the crowd began moving once more. Slow. Patient. Endless. And somewhere deep inside Daniel, he felt something new. A quiet, growing emptiness. Like a hollow place forming in his chest. A space where something dark was beginning to live. And with every mile he walked, that hollow place grew wider, waiting for the moment when it would finally open. The nights became longer after that. Daniel no longer kept track of time. Days blurred together beneath endless highways and empty landscapes. The desert slowly gave way to forests, then plains, then mountains again. He walked through places where the wind carried the smell of rain and through places where the air felt dry enough to crack stone. But wherever he went, the silence followed. At first it was subtle. A small roadside cafe would close unexpectedly after he passed through. A quiet neighborhood would suddenly have for sale signs appearing on half the houses. Gas stations would shut down weeks after Daniel stopped there. Then the changes became harder to ignore. Entire towns seemed to empty faster than they should. News reports occasionally mentioned strange things. Communities where dozens of residents moved away within days. Businesses closing overnight. Streets growing unusually quiet. Daniel never stayed long enough to watch it happen. But he always heard about it later. And each time he felt that hollow place inside his chest grow a little wider. One cold morning he reached the edge of a forest in northern Colorado. The highway curved along the mountains, surrounded by thick pine trees that swallowed most of the sunlight. The air smelled of wet earth and moss. Daniel had not slept properly in weeks. His beard had grown thick and uneven. his clothes worn from constant travel. He looked like someone who had been running from something for a very long time. Which, in a way, he had. He stopped near a wooden sign beside the road. Raven Creek. Population 642. The town sat quietly in a valley ahead. A small place. One main road, a few scattered buildings, smoke rising gently from chimneys. Daniel stared at it for a long time. He hadn't entered a town in nearly 2 weeks. He knew what might happen if he did. But his legs felt weak. His throat was dry. He needed food. And for the first time in months, the crowd behind him seemed further away than usual. Maybe they had slowed. Maybe he had gained distance during the night. Maybe, just maybe, he had time. Daniel stepped into Raven Creek just before noon. The town felt normal. Children rode bicycles down the street. A pickup truck rumbled past. An elderly couple sat outside a small cafe drinking coffee. Daniel almost forgot about the hollow darkness inside him. Almost. He entered the cafe and ordered a sandwich. The waitress smiled politely. "You passing through?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah. Just traveling." She refilled his water. "You look like you've had a long trip." He gave a tired smile. "You could say that." For the first time in months, he allowed himself to sit still. Warm food. Voices around him. The simple comfort of being somewhere alive. It felt dangerous how good it felt. After eating, Daniel stepped outside and sat on a bench facing the street. The sun hung low behind the mountains. Late afternoon already. He knew he should leave soon. Before dark. Before the hollow place inside him had time to grow stronger. A man sat down beside him. Daniel didn't look at first. But then he noticed the familiar stillness. The unnatural quiet. He slowly turned his head. The copy of Daniel sat beside him. Head tilted. Watching the people walking along the street. "You stopped running," the copy said softly. Daniel looked around quickly. The town still looked normal. No pale figures. No silent crowd. "They're far away," Daniel whispered. "For now." Daniel's voice was tight. "I needed to rest." The copy nodded slightly. "Yes. Humans always do." A group of kids ran past the bench laughing. The copy watched them carefully. "They don't know," it said. Daniel clenched his fists. "Don't. They don't see the darkness coming." "I said stop." The copy looked at him. "You brought it here." Daniel stood up quickly. "No. You stepped inside the town." Daniel's breathing became faster. "I'll leave before night." The copy slowly stood as well. "It doesn't work that way anymore." Daniel felt the cold dread rising again. "What do you mean?" The copy pointed toward the street. Daniel followed its finger. Something had changed. The road felt quieter. The cafe door was closed. The children were gone. A strange stillness had settled over Raven Creek. Daniel whispered, "No." The copy spoke gently. "It has begun." Daniel turned in a slow circle. The town looked the same. But something was missing. The noise. The life. The warmth. It felt thinner somehow. Like the air had lost something important. Then Daniel saw them. At the far end of the road. Standing between the buildings. Pale figures. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. The crowd had arrived. Much sooner than it should have. Daniel staggered backward. "That's impossible." The copy looked pleased. "The door is opening faster now." Daniel shook his head in panic. "People live here." "Yes." "Families." "Yes." The copy's voice remained calm. "They will join us soon." Daniel felt the hollow space inside his chest suddenly expand. Like a door slowly unlocking. A cold pressure pushed outward from within him. He dropped to one knee. The copy watched closely. "You feel it now." Daniel gasped. "Make it stop." But the copy only whispered, "You cannot close a door once it begins to open." The pale crowd continued walking into Raven Creek. And for the first time, Daniel realized something even more terrifying. They were no longer just following him. They were moving through him. Like shadows passing through a doorway. And that doorway was his heart. As the first pale figures stepped past him and entered the town streets, Daniel heard the whispers again. Louder than ever. Home. 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 Daniel collapsed onto both knees in the middle of the quiet street. The pressure in his chest felt unbearable now, like something inside him was pushing outward, stretching the hollow place wider with every breath. Around him, Raven Creek had begun to change. At first, the changes were subtle. The wind stopped moving through the trees. The distant sound of a truck engine faded away. A dog that had been barking somewhere in the neighborhood suddenly fell silent. Then the stillness deepened. Windows slowly closed. Doors shut. Not slammed. Not hurried. Just closed. Like the town itself was retreating. Daniel forced himself to look up. The pale figures were entering the town from every direction now. They walked slowly between the buildings, spreading through the streets like a quiet tide. Their heads were still tilted. Their expressions empty. Their eyes fixed on Daniel. The copy stood a few feet away, watching everything with calm curiosity. "It's happening faster now," it said. Daniel grabbed his chest. "Stop them. They are not mine to stop. They are yours." The copy shook its head slightly. "No, they are yours." Daniel struggled to breathe. "I didn't want this." "Intent does not matter." The copy stepped closer. "Doors do not choose what passes through them." Daniel felt something shift inside him. A deep cold expanding through his ribs. The hollow space had grown so wide that he felt almost weightless. Like his body was becoming an empty shell. Across the street, a man stepped out of a small grocery store. He looked confused. "Hey, what's going on?" The man stared down the road where the pale crowd approached. "What the hell?" Daniel tried to shout, "Run!" But his voice came out weak. The man took a step backward as the first pale figure reached the sidewalk. "Who are you people?" The figure stopped in front of him. Its head tilted. Then it spoke with a soft, familiar voice. "You stayed after dark." The man frowned. "What?" More figures surrounded him. Slow. Silent. The man turned in panic. "Hey, get away from me." But none of them touched him. They simply stood there, watching, waiting, the same way they had once watched Daniel. Daniel whispered hoarsely, "It's starting." The copy nodded. "The town is opening." Across Raven Creek, people were stepping outside their homes, looking down the streets, trying to understand what they were seeing. The pale crowd moved deeper into the town, and everywhere they passed, the air seemed to grow colder. Lights flickered. Car engines failed. Phones lost signal. Daniel struggled to stand. His legs barely obeyed him. "I can still leave," he said desperately. The copy looked at him. "You already know the truth." Daniel shook his head. "If I go far enough, it will only spread farther." Daniel's eyes filled with fear. "Then what am I supposed to do?" The copy was silent for a long moment. Then it said something unexpected. "You could close the door." Daniel stared at it. "How?" The copy looked directly into his eyes. "The same way doors always close." Daniel waited. The copy finished the sentence quietly. "By sealing the space where they open." Daniel slowly understood. The hollow place in his chest. The doorway. If it closed, the crowd would lose their path. But the meaning behind it was clear. "You're saying I have to die?" Daniel whispered. The copy didn't answer. It didn't need to. Daniel looked around Raven Creek. Pale figures filled the streets now. People were beginning to panic. Running. Shouting. Trying to escape. But the crowd simply walked. Patient. Endless. Daniel felt the hollow darkness inside him stretching further. Soon it would open completely, and the town would pour through him into the world. He looked back at the copy. "If I do it, does it end?" The copy thought for a moment. "It ends here." Daniel exhaled slowly. That was enough. He staggered toward the center of the street where the road cut through the town square. The copy followed quietly. "What are you doing?" it asked. Daniel gave a tired smile. "Closing the door." The pale crowd stopped walking. Every face turned toward him. The whispers filled the air again. "Stay. Stay. Stay." But Daniel ignored them. He stepped into the middle of the empty intersection. Then he reached into his bag. Inside was a small revolver he had bought months ago in a remote town. He had carried it ever since, just in case. The copy watched him carefully. "You believe this will work?" Daniel nodded. "If the door is me, then removing the door should stop the hallway." The copy tilted its head slightly. "Perhaps." Daniel raised the gun slowly. His hands trembled. Not from fear. From exhaustion. Years of running had drained everything from him. He looked up at the sky. Night was beginning to fall over Raven Creek. The first stars appeared above the mountains. The whispers grew louder. "Stay after dark. Stay. Stay." Daniel closed his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Then he pulled the trigger. The sound echoed across the quiet town. For a moment nothing happened. Daniel's body fell onto the cold pavement. The gun slid from his hand. Silence spread through Raven Creek. The pale crowd stood perfectly still. The copy of Daniel walked slowly to the body lying in the street. It looked down at him. For the first time, the copy's expression changed. Not sadness. Not anger. Something closer to disappointment. The hollow darkness in Daniel's chest flickered weakly. Then, slowly, it began to close. The pale figures around the town started fading. One by one. Like mist dissolving in sunlight. The whispers faded with them. Within minutes the streets were empty again. Only the normal town remained. Lights came back on. A dog barked somewhere. A car engine started. Life returned. The copy stood alone beside Daniel's body. The doorway had closed. Ash Hollow was gone. Or so it seemed. The copy looked down at Daniel one last time. Then it turned and walked toward the dark edge of town. As it disappeared into the trees, it spoke quietly to the night. "Doors close." It paused, then finished the thought. But darkness always finds another way in. Hundreds of miles away, in a small forgotten town deep in the Midwest, a man pulled his car over beside an old rusted road sign. He had been driving for hours. The sign read, "Welcome to Blackridge. Population, 1,093. The man stepped out of his car and looked down the empty road leading into town. The sun was almost gone. Night was coming. And far down the road, under the first flickering streetlight, a single pale figure stood waiting. Its head tilted slightly to one side.